Hello, welcome to season 5 of Hot Pot Talks. My name is Jen Sunshine here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng, as well as our special guests, Namande and Nokuthula. David and I are the co artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective based in Vancouver, Canada, that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities of color. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Hot Pot Talks is organized from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As uninvited guests, we recognize and extend our gratitude to the stewards of this land who have been protecting it since time immemorial. Part of our work as activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back.
For season 5, we are very excited to be collaborating with a dear friend of mine and a new co host. Namande Alisa is a longtime collaborator of Love Intersections. Namande is a fat Black feminist in love with stories. She is fascinated by the ways people's lived realities shape their joys and pains, and believes that there is healing to be found in the stories we choose to tell, and salvation, perhaps, in who we choose to tell them to. Radical softness is her weapon of choice in a world that often casts her as a hard, fat, Black obstacle. Food, hunger, sex, access, and desirability are her favorite topics. She is a feminist scholar. Fat activism, sustainability, climate resilience, and food security are her passions. Please welcome Namande.
Hello, Hot Pot Talks family. I would like to welcome Nokuthula, who is our guest today. Nokuthula's full name is Ingekwazi Nokuthula Mnguni, um, and she is an artist and traditional healer with a passion for storytelling. Her current projects include researching and sharing the history of Southern African tribes and beliefs before the advent of colonization, a stokvel or community bank that gives financial support to 12 women around the globe, providing mental health care and spiritual mentorship to queer and other youth. And she also advocates for the improved integration of displaced, disabled, and neurodivergent people into society. Welcome, Nocturne.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Noctula. Maybe tell us where you are right now.
So I am currently in Trinidad in an area called St. Joseph. It's known as the land of the hummingbird. Just as part of my Zen culture, soft girl culture. Hi, no one there. I love to bring myself to places that encourage me to remain soft and remain tranquil in this very crazy, wild world. And I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much to the Love Intersections team. I'm so excited to be on Hot Pot Talks. I manifested this interview. I'm so excited.
Maybe Namande, maybe you can tell us why you were interested in inviting Noctula to this conversation, especially around this theme of, decolonizing spirit and reclaiming spirituality, food, which is sort of some of the themes that we've been exploring this season.
Yes. So I first saw Noctula on TikTok. I'm a little TikTok obsessed. I'm one of those doom scrollers. Although it doesn't feel like doom, it's joy for me. So that's why I first saw Noctula, and her energy and her spirit. I was captivated. You know, you can literally feel someone's almost like, I don't know, spirit through a screen. That was
Yeah.
how I felt Noctula the first time I saw her. And I loved how boldly she was herself and how much pride and dignity she had in the work that she does, in who she is, in how she moves in the world, how she speaks about African spirituality and reclaiming indigenous knowledge. And I loved that. I resonated so deeply with that. Mainly because I've said before, um, once my dad died, my world was like turned on its head. And in part of sort of finding my way back to myself from that, what really helped me draw back, almost back into my own skin. Because I learned about things like disassociating after my dad passed, because I was doing a lot of that. I just was not there, you know? And what helped me sort of find my way back into my own skin and into my own head and my mind and my soul was reclaiming ancestral, indigenous, religious knowledge. It was reaching out to my ancestors and saying, sorry, I'm so lost and I need a way back to me. Sorry, I didn't expect to get emotional.
Let it out,
And
sis. Let it out.
the pain was so deep, and it's so incredibly. Everyone says grief is hard, but when you're in it and it's driving you mad and it's all that you can feel and think about, you can't believe how genuinely hard it is. And reaching out to the people who came before me, reaching back into my bloodline, calling out to my ancestors and reaching for my father in the other world, it brought me back to me. And so I've been on this path to just really understand who we are and what we come from, because there's so much power in that. There's so much power in our origins and our ancestors. And I wanted to share that with everybody. I wanted to learn more about it for myself, and I wanted to share it with everybody, because I think it's a gift that we've all lost, that has been stolen from us by colonization and slavery, and this determined kind of corruption of culture and community and family. And uh, and yeah, that's part of the reason why this series is so important to me, and why I really want to know to come here and speak to us, because she is knowledgeable about this. She's a spiritual healer herself. And I think, especially now in the time we're all going through, we all need so much healing. And this is one of the most beautiful ways and the most authentic ways and the realest ways that I found to heal my spirit and my heart. And I wanted Nokuthula to be able to share that with all of us, and so that we can share our own experiences, um, as well. Yeah.
I just want to say before, hearing from Nokuthula, just, Namande, thank you so much for offering. It takes tremendous vulnerability to, offer yourself in the way that you just did, so open. And I think I lost my father-in-law recently. Um, and so death has been sort of, I've always been fascinated by death and dying, and how we as a society, or different cultures and backgrounds, talk about death and dying. Um, and I was very lucky to have grown up in, a Buddhist household where death and dying is talked about in a way that didn't feel scary. And so I felt primed to handle a lot of these recent deaths that I've been encountering, in and around my communities and life. Um, and so I don't know where I'm necessarily going with this, but I'm just very moved by
Yeah.
how you shared that. So thank you.
And likewise, and I think I'll just quickly, and I think there's a reason why we're having this conversation today as well. um I was sharing with Jen right before we recorded. I also had a really close friend pass away last year, and last night I had a really, really difficult conversation with my partner, and we were really in it in terms of the grieving. And so I don't know. It feels like there's a reason why we're having this conversation today as well. Um, and so, anyway, thank you, Namande, and also thank you, Nokuthula, for being in this space with us um, today.
Thokozani, thokozani,
Hmm.
thokozani. That's what we say in isiZulu. which essentially means be joyful, in a time of grief,
Mm.
in a time when we're all a little bit lost. So I appreciate all of you just being so open and vulnerable. It's one of the things that I believe our ancestors are healing through people like yourselves. Community, community, because we live in a world now that enforces in us to just be individuals,
Yeah.
isolates, deal with grief on your own. And that's not how it should be. No, Monday, I think you especially could resonate with the sentiment of we are lost in terms of our roots. We have had to adapt to a system that was
Mm.
designed and enforced on us, especially as South Africans. Some of us don't remember who we are. And for us as Indigenous people, not just in Africa, but all over the globe, I think belonging, having your roots, understanding who you are, informs a lot of where you are as well as where you are going.
Mm.
So us coming together like this, it's part of the healing process. Us being able to learn during that process is just an added bonus. So I am here to answer any questions and just share from my experiences. I love how it's going so far, where maybe the team can lead with their concepts and ideas, and I can share from my knowledge and experience.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you so much. Noktula, I'm curious, could you maybe tell us about your journey of becoming a spiritual healer?
Absolutely. How much time do you have, David?
All the time in the world.
Okay. So let me tell it from the perspective of a big sister, if you would allow me. Because I feel that as middle aged, I can't believe I'm gonna be 40 soon. That's wild to me, but. I'm very excited,
Mhm.
So as millennials and upcoming Gen Zs, we don't necessarily have the guidance available that used to be there before. Before we grew up in communities that were very tight knit, the village or the
Yeah.
community would come together. There would be constant exchanging of what is going on, who's sick, who needs help, who needs support, and we don't have that anymore. So, how my
Mm.
journey began? The journey begins as soon as you're born. If I'm being honest, it begins from when you are born. It just takes your whole life for you to understand that. And so for me, where I would say I started becoming more aware of my abilities and what was going on is a part of life where I was working in corporate Johannesburg, very hectic, very intense. I was under a lot of pressure. I was under a lot of stress. I was experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome. I was working with huge academic institutions that I never dreamed I would work with before. And at that point, I experienced what in the West, I suppose, would be termed a psychotic or a nervous break, if you will. And during that break, I started having very intense dreams, visions, hallucinations. I would see my ancestors, I would see my own relatives who had passed. Nomonde, as you sort of long for your father, I was also very much grieving my grandparents. But as Black women, we're never really allowed that. It's a matter of, hey, it happened, get
Yeah.
over it and move on. And that sort of makes it difficult. So, in experiencing these visions and dreams, I was fortunate enough to be led towards another traditional healer who then was able to explain to me what it is that was happening. And he then prepared what we call amakobongo, which is traditional African medicine, specifically designed for what we call our ancestors or our ancestral spirits.
Mm.
And I struggle to sort of maybe explain the concept because it's very different to the concept of Western medicine in the sense that the medicines occur naturally and they are not necessarily treating you, the human, but they are treating your psyche, which we would term the spirits, as well as then those traumas and those hurts of the people in your past that run in your blood because they are a part of you. They will always be a part of you. And that's why you always miss them so much, especially if you were
Mm.
really close to them during life. Um, Maybe if you could ask more specific
I
aspects of the
Mhm.
journey.
I
Yeah.
have some questions. When we initially met to talk about recording this Hot Pot Talks, you had talked about, you know, growing up and being born in a sort of a small rural town in South Africa. I'm curious, I'm looking at the scale and of the scale of time. So you had talked about, you know, talking through your hallucinations and your experiences with another healer. Was there any kind of conflict or resistance or even internal sort of contradiction with the teachings that you grew up with, specifically in the church, in the Anglican church? So I'm curious about, I think I remember what we had talked about originally around the sort of discouragement of communing with your ancestors. So I'm curious if there were any sort of thinking there or experiences there that you had gone through.
Yes, Jen. So, when we spoke last time, I had mentioned that I grew up in Mutu, which is classified as a village. Actually, I don't think it's a town. We have one set of traffic lights, and I love my hometown. But I grew up in a Christian Anglican home, and the Anglican Church is very similar to the Roman Catholic Church. I firmly believe our family, the Mnguni family specifically, having gone into the church because they became priests and pastors. And it's a little bit difficult for me to speak about because my mother is also one of these church leaders. And so I feel in a lot of ways we go into those Abrahamic institutions as a way to get away in a way from the complexities of our spirituality. That's one, but at the
Yeah,
same time, with the advent of colonization, we were greatly discouraged from
yeah,
exploring these parts of ourselves, and we were told to go into these institutions.
Mhm.
So yes, yes, I had a whole lot of backlash from my family. They essentially treat it as though you are an insane person, you are practicing some sort of what they call witchcraft, dark arts. It's just seen in a very dark and negative connotation. So I had a big struggle with that, especially as well as someone who is coming from, I wouldn't say our family was well off, but we were comfortable. So in your sort of comfortable to middle class families in South Africa, you now suddenly saying you want to go back to traditional or indigenous beliefs. What are you
yeah,
talking about? What do you mean we don't do that over here? The blood of Jesus covers everything. And unfortunately, we are Africans. That is the reality of what it is. We are Africans. We are children of the soil. These religions came after. And so it was a very difficult navigation. I was forced to go to church every single Sunday, and interestingly, I used to get sick very often myself and my
mm,
grandmother, under
Mm.
whose tutelage I worked. We would get sick every time we went to church, and I became the first person in my family to not go for catechism classes and also not receive Holy Communion. So I've never taken Holy
wow,
Communion. I am the first person in my family. So I would say my ancestors got it right with me. They had been put on hold generation after generation, but eventually at some point they will send that one outspoken, bold, not afraid to
yeah,
be
Mm.
seen black woman. And I had to do it because the things that I went through, I do not want my children and grandchildren, if I do have any, to experience that.
Mhm.
Mm, mm.
Mm.
What
Thank
do
you.
you say to the idea that a lot of African, South African rather, spiritualists believe that there can be a coming together of traditional Christian practice and then African practice, and they often try to combine the two. So I met a spiritual healer recently who is what's it? Mzalan, you know that
Salwane,
lady.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But she's also a sangoma. And I just, to my mind, I struggle to understand how she makes that work. But like, what do you think of that?
Questions I love. No wonder it's time to get controversial. I played Simon's over. Um, so
I love it.
yes, one of the things that I try to do is not shy away from certain topics. There's a lot of topics that most traditional healers and religious figures will shy away from. I am not one of those people. So let me be bold and upfront. For me, in terms of how I understand African spirituality and all the people I've interacted with, there is no such thing as you being umzalwane. Umzalwane essentially means you're a born again Christian. You have given your life to Jesus. Therefore, if you've given your life to Jesus, you have made an agreement. You work, you serve that deity, that figure, that is the religion or faith that you are under. When you
Mm,
come now to traditional African practices, there's going to be a clash of ideas there. Because, for one, most of us have an ancestral trauma of
Mm,
ancestors who were forced to go
mm,
into the Christian church, running away from their gifts, feeling shame for what they were experiencing. And when we go into even more controversial territory, you have those institutions that respectfully and honorably do try to bridge the gap between Christianity and traditional African practices, but it always goes wrong because the ethics of Christianity and the ethics of Isintu or African spirituality simply do not correlate. They do not.
mm,
mm,
mm.
mm, mm, mm.
If should I
Not to
maybe
like.
go into some examples? Sorry, David, before you
No,
ask.
Yeah.
please. No, no, no. Please, please. More.
Mm,
Yeah, please.
For example, I think I briefly mentioned the last time we chatted that in the Christian church, you are discouraged from venerating your ancestors, acknowledging spirits of the dead. Whereas
mm.
in African spirituality, that's what you're doing from sunrise to sunset.
Mm,
I see
mm.
dead people, that's your whole life. So, how do you
Yes.
marry those two ideas? That's the
Yeah.
part that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate that so much because that's, I mean, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian church, and part of yeah, the biggest, I think, struggle that I've had with coming to terms with that trauma is, discovering, because in Chinese culture we have veneration ceremonies too. I have an altar at my door, and my dad for a very long time was very very triggered because it's pagan, it's considered pagan, and um, idolatry, right, in Christianity. And so I very much resonate with what I'm hearing from you, Noktula, because it's a struggle that I also have um, with my family in terms of how they understand, how they understand ancestral veneration. I'm curious, Noctula, I wanted to go back to, I'm also really curious about the conversation, the story you were sharing around psychosis. Um, it's something that, so my grandmother was manic and also paranoid schizophrenic. And my cousin, Kai Cheng Tom, who's an artist, and I always have talked about this also in terms of the trauma that had in our family, but also to my grandmother, who was essentially, you know, immigrated to Canada into a small town, the only Chinese family in the entire town, and essentially was in psychosis for about 5 years. Running down the streets, screaming. And part of what my cousin and I have been talking about was also because she was a very powerful woman. She was a very, very powerful, and um, uh, she was a huge personality and a really big part of our family. And so part of, I think, yeah, I'm just curious to know more about that story of how you've been thinking about mental health, and in terms of from a non-Western, I guess, point of
Mm.
view, and thinking about yeah, things like psychosis outside of sort of a colonial framework, if you will.
I'm also curious, so before I get into that, I'd be
Mm,
very curious to find out how you yourself started venturing into the more traditional Chinese practices because I have a fair understanding of the Japanese Shinto beliefs, very similar to ours. So
Mm-mm.
I find Asian spirituality very interesting in that we
Yeah.
share a lot of common concepts. So what drew you to sort of going back, if I can ask that?
Yeah, totally. It was being queer. And
Mm,
I think for
mm,
such a long time, I mean, the church that I went to, like the level of conservatism, I think is quite extreme. Like it was a no kissing before marriage, not just no sex before marriage. Like it was the idea that there was a book called "I Kissed Dating Goodbye" in the '90s, where literally the book opens with the guy, the author, sharing this dream that he had, and it was him and the love of his life at the altar, and they're about to share their first kit, their wedding, seal the wedding or whatever. And in the dream, there's all the women behind him that he had kissed, and how terrible that was, and how such a betrayal to his wife. And so it opens with that, and this book became spread like wildfire throughout the churches, in the fundamentalist churches in the Canada and the US in the '90s. This was sort of the purity ball era,
mm.
where like we didn't do this at my church, but where like daughters would pledge their virginity to their fathers and
Ugh,
wear the purity rings and all of that stuff, right?
gross.
And so growing up as like a closeted queer kid, I really grappled with 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 the religion that I was growing up with, and really struggling with you know the question of, if God is fair and if God is just, how could something, me loving another person, at the time, it was like me, it was about love, but even the act of sex, like if we're going to go there, how could that, like something so beautiful and human, be something that would be considered a sin. And it was, I would say, like so from like puberty, when I started realizing that I had was gay, um almost about 10 years it took, to really sort of really grapple with scripture,
Mm,
and then also what I actually believed. And so from my journey sort of away from that type of doctrine, realizing also the sort of trauma of, I think, because I think, going back to the conversation we had around grief and loss, trying to find those ceremonies and rituals, that I wasn't allowed to practice, or was considered sinful, has sort of been a part of that trajectory, if you will. And I'll be honest, really, it was actually also, it coincides with Love Intersections. A lot of the work that we've been doing around race and queerness, has also led me into like a different, another journey. And of course, this is also which has also led to this series as well, in terms of exploring, yeah, and reclaiming spirituality.
I joke that, even to this day, I joked one time to David. I asked, you know, I just had to ask and break the ice. It had been like 10 years of us knowing each other
Yeah.
and working together and being really good friends. And I just had to ask one day, and I was like, "What's up with your hugs? Terrible, terrible hugs." And um, and my partner also asked me, like, yeah, like, what's up with David's hugs? And so I had to
And
ask David to explain why your hugs were so rigid, and to connect it to sort of the physical
mm,
embodiment and manifestations of that kind of doctrine. So I'll let David kind of speak
yeah,
more to that.
it's it's the leave room for Jesus. No, leave room for Jesus. Like, you don't want to press someone else's breasts against you, in case of the
Temptation.
temptation. And it's so ingrained in my body that, like, as Jen
whoa.
mentioned, that's why my hugs are so terrible. It's always like,
What is
It's so stiff and so terrible. Like, I'm going in, right? I want like full heart to heart embrace, but it's like
Tighten up.
Sorry, I
Well,
digress.
that's interesting to learn, David, and I'm glad I asked as well. Sorry, because I find that there is no room for queer people in Christianity. Let's be real. There's no room
Mm,
for people who yearn for more. It's just this is what we have. You either take it or you go home. You either take these scriptures and you figure out
mm,
that depression, or you figure out another way. So I think it also then gives premise to the question that you asked. When you speak about your own relatives who experienced the dementia and the psychosis, I firmly believe, I have a saying that we are all sick in this current day and
Mhm.
age. We are all sick. Some of us less than others, some of us more than others, but we're all sick purely because we have lost a lot of understanding again of who we are. So when I am speaking about psychosis in my case, for instance, this will now go back to my grandmother. So my grandmother was a Xhosa woman of the Amavunje tribe. She had an ancestral calling herself. Unfortunately for her, fortunately in some ways, they grew up right opposite a mission church. I forget what it's called, but it's one of the Dutch Reformed churches. I can find out for you
mm,
later. And they had to go to church. Honey, you're hearing voices, you have an urge to go to water, go to church. Here's an instrument, pick it up. So the music part of it is where I say it was fortunate, but it was unfortunate in the case that
Mhm.
when you ignore your spiritual calling, your ancestral calling, as we say, it will make your mind deteriorate because you are
mm,
living in cognitive dissonance. You are ascribing to an identity that is not you. You are living a non-truth. And if you live a lie, I I think we can all agree your mind is bound to break some way, somehow. And so we also have a belief. So I speak about my grandmother to say that our belief is our callings will tend to skip a generation, not
mm,
always. As in my instance, my mom and I have very similar dreams, which I was very shocked to find
Wow.
out, seeing as she is an Anglican church pastor. So we
Mhm.
have the same dreams. She just chooses to
mm,
ignore what is going on. And so I, having taken up this calling, it is now more intense for me because
mm,
I believe some way, somehow, on the other side, in the ancestral realm, they can see, oh goodness, we're going to end up in the same exact religious trauma that we came from. And so, in my instance, I would then experience that psychosis. We call it an illness that you must endure in the South African traditional healing community. You experience that so that you know the extreme pain that people went through, your people went through before you, and then you
mm,
do everything you absolutely can to ensure that the
mm,
future generations do not go through that. So I know for a fact I myself will not be experiencing any of that early onset dementia. That's what it becomes.
mm,
And I recently was speaking about this on TikTok as well, is to say we never really experienced dementia, period, let alone early onset dementia from my research before
mm,
colonization. It was so
mm,
rare that we would drive out people from the community if, we couldn't fix it, we couldn't cure it, but it became gradually worse the more we turned away from our traditional beliefs and
mm,
went towards more Western or
mm,
Christian practices.
mm, mm, mm,
Mm.
mm,
It's beautiful to hear you talk about, the skipping a generation. And I'm thinking in particular to my relationship with my grandmother, who, for all of my life, um, she's my only surviving grandparent, and she renounced her sort of mundane life and is to this day a Buddhist nun that lives in a Buddhist monastery in the south of Taiwan. And so when I grew up in Taiwan, I had always just known her in the Buddhist, the sort of orange robe, um, when she's in ceremony, and then the gray, sort of light gray robe when she's out, in the world or in around working in the monastery. And then when I moved to Canada, when I immigrated to Canada, I sort of had this very interesting like cognitive dissonant experience where I would have a Western quote unquote education, in elementary school, from September to June. And then I would then, once it's summer break, I would, my dad and I would, and my mom would fly back to Taiwan, and then they would put me to live with my grandmother. So in the monastery. So then I would have this sort of Eastern, almost esoteric Buddhist, education every summer, from the ages of when I immigrated to Canada was like 9 years old to about 18 or 19. So it was a very interesting sort of dichotomy. And, watching, and I tell this story a lot because I watched my grandmother, how she sort of navigated the monastic life. And I'm trying to make a connection to like all four of us and the subversion that we embody and the philosophical subversions that we inherit, but also embody and practice within the context of our upbringing and teachings and, influences and external forces, like queers, feminists, women, like witches, like pagan, like these were all sort of outcasts and outsiders and weirdos and freaks that don't conform, and therefore the church it has to instigate and control, right? It's a control mechanism through the church and through the institution. And so I'm thinking about how that's exerted in the sort of Buddhist teaching. It was like as an adult, I make those connections of, I learned that it's okay to not have, it's not a black and white, like a religion. It's not super black and white. There's lots of gray area. It's more of a practice. But I still felt at 9 years old being forced to live in a monastery and adhere to the rigidity of, waking up at 4 a.m. to the sound of the bell tower, and then like getting robed, and then going to the meditation hall with everybody and like having to meditate for like hours on end. That of course was unfathomable to a 9-year-old, and I hated it. So one thing I learned, because I was such a rebellious queer kid, because the living quarters that I would be sleeping in my grandmother's room, so it was divided by gender, right? So men on this side, women on this side, but the living quarters that just sort of that go down into the meditation hall, they were these like locked doors. And I learned very quickly that to bring like a roll of tape, and David has heard the story many times, I would bring like a roll of tape with me at like 4 a.m, and then I would wait till everybody gets down the stairs, and I would secretly tape in the latch bolt that locks the door. And then I go down to the meditation hall, everyone's meditating, and I would sneak back upstairs to go back to sleep because the door wouldn't be locked. And so these sort of moments where as an adult, I'm thinking about, like, did my grandmother not know, or did she just let me get away with it? It's likely the latter, right? It's likely she just was like, I'm not going to force this environment on you. I'm going to let you choose how you want to navigate and interact and encounter this philosophical, this religious, spiritual practice, how you want to do it, and see what happens, And I'm to this day, I'm very thankful, for her to not force it on me, but to just let me experience it how I experience it. And then over time, I realized, there is merit and value and meaningfulness to sitting quietly and, to meditate, right? Like there's all these benefits that we know now. And I'm like, okay, so they were right. But I had to find my own way into it, if you will.
Yes.
So interesting to hear you speak about that, Jen. It's bringing up so many points of similarity, in the sense that you, in the first instance, speak about the closeness of our relationships with our grandparents, and you're very lucky, by the way, to still have your grand. I hope you make the most of the time that you have with her, because I firmly believe that we become almost the ultimate version of our grandmothers. David and Nomonde, maybe if you think back to your grandparents who are no longer around,
Mm.
they can't believe you're doing the things that they were softly encouraging you to
Yeah.
do if you think about it.
Mm.
So it's such a beautiful thing. And at the same time, you speak then about rigidity. Oh, that's exactly what it is, Jen. It's the rigidity in everything, because we know in queerness there's a spectrum, right? In being neurodivergent or being different, there's a spectrum. In artistry, there's a spectrum. And it's almost like the entire world is so set on stifling that spectrum.
Mm.
Right? You have to fit
Mm.
into here. And it's so beautiful. We might have to start a church at this point, because in the workplace, the spectrum is stifled. No, don't think outside the box. Keep it here, what it is that you need to do. And this is what is directly contributing to most of us feeling so lost in the world. So it gives me hope at the same time that we are holding on to embody the philosophies of our grandparents, and then hopefully carrying them
Mm.
into the future. And that's what it's all about. I believe that's what going back to our indigenous practices and beliefs is definitely all about.
Mm.
Mm.
Do you know what's always been really difficult for me in the world generally, whether it's religion, life lived amongst people, working, going to school, is this the rigidity and the intense need for everyone to conform to a certain way of being, living. We all wake up at this time, we go to school this time, we eat at this time, these steps that people have set up. And one of the things I've always loved most about myself, and I still really love it, is that I embrace chaos and I like to bring chaos to situations. Not immense chaos, but some. And I'm known as the chaotic one in our family. I'm that girl who is gonna do what I'm gonna do, and yeah, you're either gonna come along or
Same.
not, but I'm going my
Same.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and what I've loved about indigenous practice is it has given me a sense of freedom, a sense of, yeah, you're really odd in most instances, but there are instances where the oddness is actually the norm, you know?
Mm.
I was reading a
Yeah.
really interesting article about how there's so many mental illnesses, people have so much anxiety, there's depression everywhere, and everyone was like, what's wrong with everyone? What's wrong? And then this one girl, and I wish I could remember her so I could even say her name now. But she said, maybe there's nothing wrong with us. Maybe our reactions are what is normal, and what is wrong is the societies and the way we're forcing ourselves to live. So, how we are, all of us, in our
Mm.
queerness, in our neurodivergence, in our odd, chaotic joyfulness, that is the norm, in fact. It is
Mm.
not what is outside. It is not what is abnormal. That
Mm.
is how it should be. And everything else where everyone is trying to stuff you into this box and make you adhere to this little perfect way of living and existing, that is abnormal. And that is the reason for so much of all of like our pain and our grief and like this anguish that so many people are
Mhm.
going through, especially when you are black, a person of color, queer, a woman, especially if you embody any kind of feminine energy, I think especially. Um, it's so incredibly difficult to be feminine in so many spaces, especially religion, especially in our Brahmic religions that so often go out of their way to hate the feminine. And that was so empowering for me. The healing I found in one, embracing my chaos and not just being chaotic, but loving the chaos of my thoughts, the chaos of how I exist, the chaos of my feelings. The fact that I will laugh in one moment and weep in the next, you're also an example of that.
Yes.
The fact that I feel so deeply, I feel very deeply, and I used to be so ashamed of that. I used to feel
Mhm.
such shame in that. And Jen, it's so funny when you're talking about the hug conversation. I remember the first time I hugged David, and he did do the arm thing. But then what I did is I held him super, super tight and I squished him. And he's hugged me really great since then.
Oh,
And just yeah, embracing the chaos and the warmth and the love that I found in that, and that I find in people like you, all of you, um, because you're with me in that, you know. And so yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
And that's where we connect, Nomonde. You call yourself chaotic. I call myself problematic. And one of my favorite people, I don't know if Jen and David would know him, but Nomonde, you need to tell them about Musa Kawula.
Ah!
Like, they need to know about our Chomi, please. We have this problematic, he's like a Wendy Williams wannabe. He's in jail right now. But I love him. He's such a gossip girl, but I love him so much because he's just himself, right? He knows he
Yeah.
has problems. He knows he's not okay, but he's just living life. And maybe just to use that to tell a story and make a point is to say that's what our traditional beliefs encourage.
Mm,
And that's that freedom that these institutions don't want, right? In one of our artistic rituals, ukugida, which is
mm,
dancing, it's like a feverish dancing with the drumming.
mm,
Abandon all your stress, abandon your grief. You're here with people who love you, we care about you. We don't care what's between your legs. We don't care if you're seeing things and hearing voices. Honey, we do too. Come, let's hang out. And that's the beauty of that. And we don't have those
yeah.
institutions anymore. And that's
Mm,
heartbreaking. It's one of the
no.
reasons why I get excited when I see people like Love Intersections, those types of communities. It gives me hope. As much as most of your work is kind of virtual right now, I know you probably have spaces that artists can come to, and that's how we're going to sort of heal our lost community, our lost safe spaces, where we don't have to be masculine all the time, where we can be soft, where we can be vulnerable. It's very difficult. Um, Maybe to share, it's very difficult sometimes to be vulnerable as a Black woman, especially a
Mm,
South African Black woman, especially a neurodivergent Black woman. First of all, how dare you be different from the rest of us,
mm,
right? We're all weird, but why are you so weird? That's one. And then second to that, why are you feeling everything? Why? How are you always so happy? Why are you always calling out all the things that are wrong?
mm,
That's how it should be. People should feel their feelings. There's something wrong in a world where you are told to shun your feelings, pretend to be something that you're not. And I firmly believe that slowly but surely we are going to head
mm,
back to where we're supposed to be, and we're all going to heal through each other. We're all healing through each other here. I don't think I am the healer. We are all healers. All artists are healers, period.
mm.
Mm.
There was something I wanted to say. So, you did an amazing series on therapy in traditional African practice. I was so moved by
Mm.
that.
Mm.
Um, I am a Western therapy kind of dropout. I've tried for years to go to therapy. For years, I've tried. I studied psychology. I actually wanted to become a psychologist.
Mm.
And it has just never worked. It has never worked for me. And I remember I even told David and Malika one time when we were still at UCT, I was like, I think I'm going to be a psychologist. And both of them were like, no, don't do that.
Did I say that? That's
Everyone who wants to heal wants to study psychology.
Yeah, I
yes.
really,
You
and
have
I
to, yeah.
wanted to figure out, because when you're not okay. And figuring out what is not okay with you is a journey, and even coming to the consensus that actually maybe you're fine and everyone else is kind of the problem. But the reason therapy didn't work for me was because of how it's not warm. I remember the first time I went in and my therapist said to me, please remember, I'm not here as your friend, right? We have professional norms and rules, and I'm not your best friend, and I'm never going to share about my life, and it's all about you, and you must talk. It's like talk through healing. And I was like, I get it. I get why you have those norms and rules, professionalism. That's awesome. Abuse can happen when people are sharing so intensely, so deeply, but that doesn't work for me. I can't speak at someone who is just a receptacle and doesn't give anything back. I
Mm,
can't heal in the presence of someone who is not allowed to connect with my soul. And
mm,
the
mm,
literature and the writing and the knowledge you shared about African indigenous mental health practices was the first time. And I mean, this happened what? This was in November. I think you posted that. And that was the first time I was like, I get this. This makes sense to me. And so I've been seeking out people who work in those spaces. There's not many in Nokuthula. There's not many, and like I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I
mm,
love to hear your thoughts. Do you do that kind of work? Do you do that kind of healing with people? Do you have are there communities where people like me who just don't connect with Western therapy can come seek out this what makes sense to us, to our souls, and like how do we reach that?
Whew, you're opening a whole other can of worms there, Nomonde. In answering your question, there's a question I like to ask South Africans, especially Black South Africans, when they're seeking out therapy, is I say to them, okay, you are going to consult with someone who, let's say, for example, is Annelies van der Merwe, right, who's an Afrikaner, right? Annelies, first of all, did not grow up in a rural area or a township where you did. So she has no idea about what you're saying when you speak about I slept hungry sometimes, I feel scared all the time. She will not be able to relate. There's no
Mm-hmm.
mm,
point of relation there at all.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, they are graduating from academic institutions where everything is rigid. You cannot cross certain lines. Whereas for us in traditional therapy, uh, you would have seen people refer to me as Gogo or Mkulu, which means grandmother or grandfather. You are encouraged to embody, that spirit of your ancestors, that warmth, that
mm,
motherly, grandmotherly, grandfatherly love. And that's how people will then gravitate towards you and feel comfortable to open up. And so you don't have that in Western therapy. We do have those communities in Southern Africa. The challenge at the moment, Nomonde, is legitimization,
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
right?
mm,
As it stands,
Yeah.
when you ask, do I do that type of work? Yes, I do that type of work. Am I qualified to do that type of work? Through my own experience, through my own research, yes. Do I have a piece of paper that tells people that I'm qualified to do this? As, for example, a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist in the West? No. Is there an institution that gives out these pieces of paper? No. So it's very complex and complicated at the moment, but the communities do exist. One of maybe the sort of small side quests, side projects that you could help me with is I have been trying to sort of compile a database of a few people, not so many, maybe 5 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
where we can recommend and say, hey, if you need counseling therapy or Wuthetha, you can go here. If you need
mm,
psychotherapy, which is your rapid eye movement treatments, your water immersion treatments,
mm,
you can go here, so on and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
it is there, it's just not regulated. And I
mhm,
strongly believe we're losing a lot in terms of leaning more towards Western ways of healing. Because one of my pet passions of frustration or sources of frustration is the use of antidepressants and mood stabilizers
mm,
in terms of treating mental illnesses in people, because not everybody knows that those things alter the structure of your DNA.
mm,
They alter the structure of your brain chemistry, your physiology. And so therefore, when it comes to spiritual connection, when it comes to tuning in, you start experiencing problems,
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
and the side effects will generally make you worse. So I firmly believe we are all awakening. You see people leaning more towards homeopathic remedies. We're not all running to the shop for colds and flu anymore. We know. ginger, turmeric, this and that. But then we still have the giant that is big pharma to contend with. But we do have the communities. They exist. They
Mm.
are growing. I hope that some way, somehow, our governments and our traditional leaders would meet us halfway. Is to
Mm.
say, let's find a way to legitimize these institutions and encourage people to heal the natural way, the way that it was intended.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 No, that's beautiful. And I'm there. I'm there for that kind of work. I'm there, absolutely. One of the things that has given me so much energy with this kind of work and this kind of healing as well is seeing, I mean, Chinese medicine
Mm.
has been one of the tools I've used to heal myself since I think like 2005 when I first got eczema. The first relief I ever got from my eczema was because of Chinese herbal remedies.
Mm.
And it was after discovering that and learning more and more about it and learning about the science of Chinese herbalism that I came to start learning about South African plants and herbs that do exactly the same thing, that are
Mm.
prescribed and sold by South African medicine, medicinal healers, those kinds of healers coming through and giving suggestions on what to use. And it was through that kind of understanding that legitimizing the practice does matter, and we do that
Mhm.
when people like us get together and I think shine the light on it, right? I don't think there's enough sort of understanding of it. Too much of African indigenous healing, I think, is still in the dark. And
Mhm.
people think of it as being dark. And I want us to come out of the dark and shine that light on it and demonstrate this works. This is not just science as in medicine. This is spiritual science and mental
Yeah.
science and emotional science. And that's how you heal your body, not just focusing on one little thing. You look at the whole, you know?
Yeah.
So I am so down. I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it's,
reminds me.
a lot of the pharmaceuticals is an extraction of the
Mm,
potency of like natural
Exactly.
plant
Yeah.
products in the first place, right?
exactly.
So go ahead,
But it's
David.
also demanded what you're also describing, reminds me of, in terms of Chinese medicine. Jen and I have been using elements, literally the elements, but of Chinese medicine in sort of our arts practice. And one of
Mm,
the things that I love, and just I'm going back to like the boxes that sort of, we can, colonialism or, yeah, the different, I'm just thinking about the different boxes that colonialism places also, like healing and medicine, because I think about, like, one of the things I love about Chinese medicine is the science of it. The science of it is also how we look at food.
yes.
So how we prepare food, what we
Mm,
eat, what we eat in certain seasons. It's parallel to the literal herbal medicines that you're describing, like,
yes.
and so I love that sort of. Um, yeah, thinking about our bodies, and of course, food is also ceremony and things that we do
Mm,
with our family too. And so I think of it. That's just sort of a thought that's coming to mind as we're talking about sort of coming, interrogating these boundaries that were kind of put on us, and then also how, yeah, things like medicine and food are also things that we do
Right.
on a day-to-day basis, um, that is also quite healing in
yes.
many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, not
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
eating with seasons, right? It's like eat also with like cycles, like your moon
Mm,
Yeah.
cycle,
Living
like the
into
days
the
of
earth.
post moon, like all of these
Hmm.
cycles are
Yeah.
taken into consideration in the practice.
mm,
And it's so dense. Like there's like
Yeah.
hundreds of, scholarship just on the science behind
Yeah.
TCM, but it's still, considered quackery
Yeah.
mm,
in Western.
What I love though is, like, on TikTok and in like hospitals in China, they will actually in the hospitals dispense for you, like, yes, there's some, whatever pharmaceutical whatever, but it also comes dispensed
Yeah,
at the
it's a good
hospital, a,
integration.
a package of
That's
Yeah,
Chinese
yeah.
amazing.
medicine. Yeah.
I
that's
Yeah.
find
so
East
amazing.
Asia tend to be a bit better at the balance of the integration of pharmaceuticals and traditional
Mm,
medicine,
mm-hmm.
and that there's sort of a acceptance of both in tandem with each other, as
Yes.
opposed to pure rejection of one or the other. It's
Yeah.
because
Yes.
I think it
Yeah.
also, I mean, to connect this all the way back to the sort of um, around spirituality and religions, I find,
Mm,
I mean, in recent years, there's been a lot more conversions to Christianity, but for the most part, a lot of these, countries in East Asia are pluralistic. They're polytheistic rather. So,
mm,
I'm thinking about integrations of like Buddhism, Taoism,
Mhm.
um,
Confucianism.
Hinduism, Jainism, even Shinto, right? There's animism, like there's so much animism practices in like smaller, villages, at least in Taiwan where I grew up. So there's a lot of those kinds of influences that I think just expands people's ability to not be as rigid in their acceptance of other cultures and
Yeah.
practices. Yeah.
Um, I think as well, one of the things that is now happening, I guess, in terms of leading us towards the integration, is we're seeing a lot of newly graduated doctors
Mm,
integrating the African traditional practices, like David is saying, in their pharmacy,
mm.
in the dispensary. They will have,
Amazing.
Oh,
those
wow.
little African herbs, which I think is amazing. And that is going to, I guess, lead us to a place where Big Pharma is forced to say, hey, look, it works, it is what it is. But then there's going to be that whole issue there as to how to monetize
Yeah.
and mass produce, and that is going to take away from, I guess, the sacred aspects, which is the spiritual aspect of it, because it has to come together with those rituals, right? For example,
Mm,
you can't
mm,
just say to someone,
mm,
here you go, we have something that is called impepo. Almost everyone or the majority of people in South Africa use it, but some people will not know how to use it. You cannot just take it. It's not a one size fits all. You have to have a foundation of understanding what the person's problem is, what their spiritual state is, what their mental state is, emotional state is. All
Mhm.
those things matter. But
mm.
we will get there one day the more we talk about these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Noctula. Namande, I'm wondering, I'm just keep conscious of the time. Is there any burning questions that you have, Namande, for Noctula?
Um, one juicy one, one sort of, and then one sort of more serious one. Um, your take. So, for those who don't know, those of you who don't live in South Africa, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, there's been this sensationalization of um, South African traditional healing. We had this
Mm,
show about the traditional healers on one of our television platforms called Showmax. And there was a lot of controversy about this. It was very intense. There was a girl who talked about basically having inappropriate intimacy with a snake, like just weird stuff like that. And but some of it, I thought, as someone who has not been exposed to that, because my family is very Catholic and very conservative and always has been. I did the convent school. My mother, for instance, does not do the whole traditional healing thing like I did. That's how I was raised, right? There
mhm.
were aspects of it I found. I was like, oh, really? That's interesting. So, Knox, as someone who is a traditional healer, who has done the practice, who knows the work, what is your take on that kind of, I don't know, sensationalizing of our spirituality? Do you think it does more harm than good? Like, what is your feeling on that?
It definitely does more harm than good. No wonder. One of the things that upsets me is we have now a celebrity sangoma, celebrity
Mm,
traditional healer culture in South
Mm,
Africa, where it's more about the person's personality versus what it is that they're doing. We
mm,
currently have a certain traditional healer who's very high regarded, who's in prison on suspicion of unaliving people.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
wild to me, because back in the day, honey, you would be stripped off of your doctorates, so to speak. You would no longer practice because that is not natural. So you've done
No.
something somewhere along the line that's not natural. So then the sensationalism is there. Although there are, of course, as you know, certain aspects that we're not meant to speak about. going back maybe to also what Jen was saying, yes, that's what
Mm,
usually draws people in, the curiosity of the darker aspects of things, the mystery. What is it that you guys are doing when you're going here and this and that? Certain things we need to demystify and shine a light on, speak about, definitely. But I do believe there is a way and a form that it should be done, which is why I appreciate, people like yourselves who are doing it in a way that is appreciative, in a way that makes it ingestible and more accessible to other people versus sensationalizing what we're doing, because what we're doing is
Mm.
very honorable, very important, and very
mm,
essential. So, to be spicy, I am not a fan. I do not like these little celebrity healers. I think they
mm,
make people not take us seriously.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that is what it is. We're just seen as these witches who love to speak about spells. So and so cast a spell on that. That's not what it's about. That's not how
yeah,
it should be. Yeah.
yes. And then my
No.
my final question for someone who is new to this world, um,
Mm.
who is looking to find their way, who maybe is having dreams, who is having visions. What is their next step? How do they find someone safe to practice with? Because also, it's Gogo Mawen who's in prison, right? It's Gogo Mawen, you know.
I was not going to name and shame, but yes, it is.
So I not just I Gogo Mawen is not the only traditional healer I've heard of who has killed someone. So how do you do this safely? How do we find people like you, Nox? Like and people, maybe someone can't do the online thing because you're not currently in South Africa. H- Where do we find people like you? What is the next step for someone who is on this journey to do it the right way and to do it the safe way?
Um, the first thing I would say to that, sis, is before anyone even has to look for someone to help them, I need you to look within yourself, be real with yourself, speak to whatever higher form you believe in, whether it's God, it's Buddha, it's Muhammad, whoever it may be, and out loud explain the situation, because you're putting it out into the universe. I'm in a situation, I don't know what's going on, help me to understand what is going on. Right? When you then have to take practical steps and go outside, for us in South Africa specifically, we always should dream about the person who's meant to guide us or help us. So, for example, let's say when you saw me, right? Maybe my voice triggered something in you, and you were like, I have to speak to that person. That's exactly how it should be. That's how it should feel.
Mhm.
It
Mm,
shouldn't be me coming to you and saying, "Hey, Han, I love your energy. What's your star sign?" No, that's not what it should be. So, first step, you should definitely uh, find someone you connect with.
Mm,
And then in the age of super ultra consumerism, where we have the University of TikTok, Sangoma's traditional healers were a dime a dozen. My advice, spend about 6 to 12 months just watching that one or two healers that you are drawn towards. Just watch them. See how consistent they are. See if they keep speaking on the same messages. See if they live what it is
yeah.
that they're saying.
Mm.
Because as much as I'm consulting for people online, if I'm telling you, hey, make a vision board and it will make your things happen, you should be seeing me do it. I shouldn't just be
Mm.
telling you. Otherwise, I'm running a cult. And
Yeah.
Mm.
also, I would advise find a very honest traditional healer. We have very polarizing personalities, right?
mm,
You either like us or you don't like us. There's no in between. Most of us have very abrasive personalities, but that's necessary. It's usually
mm,
necessary in the work that we do, in achieving the goals that we need to achieve. So when I say find someone who's honest, you need to find someone who's going to tell it to you like it is. As soon as someone is drawing things out, right? Let's say you come for a consultation, David,
Mm.
and I say to you, okay, David, you need to go and get a cleansing. Okay.
Mm.
It must be clear. What is the cleansing for? What must happen with the cleansing? What do you need for the cleansing? How much are you going to pay for the cleansing? How
Mm-hmm.
do we know that the cleansing has worked? Did you get
Mm,
a receipt? David, most people don't even get receipts, and then I have to go and fight other traditional healers for refunds. So have a paper trail,
mm,
understand like you would be going to in a therapy session, right? Like,
right,
what is the goal here? Or am I here for counseling? Am I here to understand my ancestry? What is it that I'm
Mm,
doing?
mm,
Because if you don't have a clear goal, that's how people will end up getting scammed. You're just
Yeah.
constantly going for cleansings that don't make sense and you're not achieving any goal whatsoever.
right.
So that would be my advice to anyone who's starting out on their journey. But also, mostly, if I can, trust yourself, right?
mm,
I just recently made a post where I said, when it comes to dreams, especially, they are your dreams. For you to understand, your ancestors are telling you something. So you need to figure out, what do these things mean? Yes, come to me. I can maybe explain to you, okay, the difference between your ancestors driving you away in a Benz versus a taxi versus a bus is this or that. But at the end of the day, you must then figure out, oh, okay. So when I see Kanye, I'm about to enter a bipolar episode. I'm about
mm.
to split if I have BPD. If I'm dreaming about a bunch of children, maybe it's because I need to get back with my inner child, so on and so forth. So empowerment, empowerment, empowerment. Your traditional healer, your spiritual mentor, spiritual advisor should empower you to heal yourself.
Yes, that's perfect.
Thank,
Thank you.
yeah.
That was really
Thank you
lovely.
so.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Thank you so much, Nokuthula. It was so nice to have you on Hot Pot Talks. And I'm just, can I just say, I'm also just really loving this multi-region
Yeah.
Right?
conversation where we literally
Yes.
all across the planet.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you all so much for the opportunity. I must be honest and say I was very nervous coming into this. I've never done anything like this before,
Mm.
but the three of you have made me feel very welcome, very warm, very authentic energies, and I hope that your project, your endeavors, your everything keeps growing, keeps pushing
Oh,
on
thank
into
you.
the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
Same
you.
to you, beloved. Same to you.
thank you.